Welcome to the CrowdSource Podcast channel, where we discuss the future of crowd-based talent solutions for the enterprise.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the CrowdSource Podcast channel. My name is Nikki Powers, and today I have the pleasure of interviewing the twice published author on organization and management transformation. She was named the Generational Guru by the Washington Post and featured in the New York Times, Huffington Post, National Geographic Traveler, and CNN Money, Anne Loehr. It's so nice to have you on the show, Anne.
Nikki, thank you so much for inviting me. It's always a pleasure to be working with CrowdSource.
Great. Well, we're excited too. So let's get started by talking about the American workforce and the types of changes that we can expect to see in the American workforce over the next 2 to 10 years.
Nikki, there's so much to talk about because there are some really big changes coming to the American workforce, as you alluded to. And a lot of people are watching the presidential election for 2016, or they're watching the economy, but there's another change, and it's almost like a silent revolution that's taking place right under our noses. And the change that I'm talking about is this massive shift in workplace demographics. And there are 4 major shifts that we're going to be talking about that really are going to impact every single organization, whether it's government, nonprofit, or for-profit.
Interesting. So what are those 4 shifts?
So I'm going to kind of start off by sharing them one by one, and
Okay.
then we can go into detail as much as you want. So first of all, the shift that many people are aware of is the fact that baby boomers, the biggest generation that there is, born between 1946 and 1964, is on its way out the door of corporate America. And that's going to have a huge impact on our workforce because that brings up many, many questions about do they retire, don't they retire, are they going to go into their own practice? And it has a huge impact on all of the organizations that are in the U.S. That trend most people are aware of. The second trend that I spend a lot of time writing and talking about is the trend that women are leaving corporate America mid-career, mid-level, think Gen X in their 40s. And there's a number of reasons for that, but as you can imagine, it's a huge exodus and a huge talent drain that every organizational leader needs to start thinking about. In addition to the boomer trend and the women trend, the third trend that everybody needs to start paying attention to is the role of diversity. As of July 2011, the majority of people born in the U.S. were people of color. Now that's great, and I love diversity, and diversity is important to all organizations, but what we really need to pay attention to, Nikki, is the fact that as of now, people of color are not graduating from universities at the same rate as Caucasians. So we have to do something about that to prepare our workforce for the future. And then finally, the fourth trend, which very few people are talking about, is the role of freelancers and what are freelancers going to mean to our economy in the next 8 to 10 years.
And that's certainly in line with our point of view as well here at CrowdSource as a freelance management software company. Can you talk a little bit more about what are some of the challenges that organizations can expect to experience as a result of these 4 shifts that you mentioned?
Sure. I'd be happy to talk about the challenges. I also want to remind everybody that these are also opportunities. We are moving so fast in our globalized world that these are opportunities that the leaders and the organizations who start looking at these trends now can actually start to create a niche and start to figure out for themselves how they can take advantage of these trends. So let's start with the 4th trend that I said, but it's the one that's important for CrowdSource, is this role of freelancers. So right now, approximately 19% of our workforce is what we call freelancers. And freelancers is a confusing term. So freelancers, the way I'm describing it, are people who are not getting salary paychecks, who are not working, getting benefits, that kind of thing. They're on their own. They could be solopreneurs, they could be entrepreneurs, but they're not working in corporate America getting those paychecks. A lot of benefits of that, a lot of challenges as well. Not everybody's meant to be a freelancer, but what's going to happen in the next 5 years, by 2020, 40% of our workforce is going to be freelancers. In 5 years, Nikki, that's going to absolutely upend organizations on all types of things. So some of the opportunities and challenges are, what do we do with legal? What kind of contracts do we give these people if they're going to be working for us? What kind of obligations do they have? If they're not technically our employees, what do we do with social media? Can they post? Can't they post? What about finances? Is it better to have them full-time employees? Is it better not day a week. What are we doing? Let's look at technology. How are we going to work with them in terms of making sure that we are able to access what they have in a way that's easy to share files? And probably one of the most important ones, at least in the world that I'm in terms of organizational culture, is what does this mean for our organizational culture? If 40% of our workforce is not a full-time employee, how do we create an organizational culture that works for those who are full-time employees as well as those who are not full-time employees?
It's certainly a lot to think about for business leaders. Is there any advice that you can give to business leaders as they're preparing for those changes?
So there's lots of different things, and I do want to add on to what you say. This is a lot to take on, and when I start talking about these 4 trends, people kind of look at me like a deer in the headlights, like, where do I begin? And so I say exactly what you're saying. So usually just pick one trend and focus on that one trend, and then let's dive into that one trend and figure out how it's going to impact your organization. So if we're sticking with the freelancers, there's lots of things that we need to think about based on everything that I just said about legal, financial, etc. First of all, you need to figure out, is your culture really a freelance type of culture? There are some cultures where really freelancers just may not work for you. If it is a organization that can benefit from freelancers, what are the actual nuts and bolts? Sarah Horowitz has the Freelancer's Bible. There's CrowdSource and other resources that can help you figure out, how do we manage them? What are the do's and don'ts? What are the protocols? How do we bring them in with our full-time employees? How do we manage expectations? So there are resources out there that employees who are not familiar with it can start to look at and really start to think, where do I begin with this? If you already have a lot of freelancers and this is not news to you and you know you're going to be growing even more, then I would really encourage you to look more at the nuts and bolts in terms of the legal aspect, what types of contracts you have to put in place, and again, the Freelancers Union and other resources can help you with that.
Interesting. And really, I mean, you bring up a good point. You really have to start with the basics of figuring out how are you going to integrate these individuals into your organization as the workforce moves toward this trend, which brings up another question about culture. Now, Anne, in your Huffington Post column, you talk about a purpose-driven organization. Can you first describe what that means, and then tell us how would you weave that into the culture when a workforce is distributed across the globe, or when you have freelancers on board who are not necessarily within your 4 walls?
So to answer that question, Nikki, I'm actually going to back up a little bit and explain what organizational culture is, because people get a little like, what does this mean? And it's a soft, fuzzy aspect. So what organizational culture is, if you actually look at it and break it down, it's 3 things, Nikki. It is the values. What are the organizational values, usually stated on paper, hopefully more than that, but at least the organization has these values they believe in. Then it is the mindset. How do employees, whether they're full-time, part-time, freelancers, actually think and align with these values? And then finally, the last part is the behavior. How does this actually show up in the organization, in daily operations? So for example, if your value is integrity, is it okay for employees, again, whether they're freelancers or not freelancers, to speak up in meetings? Is it okay for them to perhaps disagree? That's all part of culture. That's making sure that the behavior marries the actual values. So that's what we mean when we talk about culture. So when you get back to organizational culture and you talk about something called purpose-driven culture, which again, people are like, what the heck does that mean? Purpose-driven culture really talks about organizations that are focused more on what they are actually doing in terms of their purpose than on what they're actually producing. Imperative, which is an organization in New York City, and Aaron Hurst is in charge of it, defines it as really 3 aspects of it. One is creating a positive impact. Second is connecting with other people by building meaningful relationships. And third is achieving continued personal growth. And the whole premise is that if you have a purpose-driven organization where people are driven by the purpose and not necessarily driven by their team or by whatever it is that they're creating, that they will be more engaged and they will be more in tune with the culture. Easier said than done. However, it is possible, and there's certain things that leaders can do within their organization to make it more of a purpose-driven organization. So to get to all of that, then you start thinking about, okay, so let's say I have a culture that welcomes freelancers as well as full-timers, but as you said, they're dispersed across the globe. They're all over the place. How do I bring them together? Well, whether it is the purpose or whether it is the vision, that is the best way to bring them together. There's a model out there that's called vision, alignment, execution. So what is the vision? How do we align everybody to the vision, and then how do we actually execute? The more clear that the leaders are in terms of what their vision is, i.e. what the purpose is, the easier it is to get everybody on board, whether they are full-timers, freelancers, or part-timers.
That's very, very helpful for our listeners, I'm sure. Now, if our listeners would like to contact you or read more about the topics discussed here today, how would you recommend that they contact you?
So my last name is spelled a little unusually, so I'm going to spell it out real quick, and then after that they can find me easily online. My last name is Loehr, so it's Anne, A-N-N-E, and then Loehr. So they're welcome to contact me on Twitter. My handle is just @Anne Loehr. They can also go to my website, AnneLoehr.com. They can email me, Anne@AnneLoehr.com. Any of those ways. Love hearing from people, love getting ideas. Oftentimes when people contact me, that's the next blog idea that I have. I write a blog on a regular basis. So please, anybody who has any questions about freelancers, the 4 trends, organizational culture, purpose, would love to hear from you and get your ideas.
Well, thank you so much, Anne. And to our listeners, we will post the links that Anne mentioned just now on our blog. That's crowdsource.com/blog. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening to the CrowdSource podcast channel. Learn more about the future of crowd-based talent solutions for the enterprise by visiting our website at crowdsource.com.